Oh, really? Obviously very all of us. And so I'm excited that we have like actually it's kind of fun to have a little group together to talk about it. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. So we're going to start off, I'm going to do a little bit of table setting. We're going to hear from Walter. Claudia and Claudia is our client services specialist, are going to say a little bit more, and then just kind of turn it to you guys for Q&A. While Walter's talking, we would ask, I think if people switch to speaker view, it would be nice so you can actually see Walter because he is delightful. And also just stay on mute so we can all hear him and be respectful. And then, but if you have questions that come up while he's talking, feel free to just send them into the Q&A. And we're also going to definitely have time for Q&A afterwards. So, and obviously it's a small group, totally informal, but because it's Zoom, want to make sure some of those things are for. So that's it. Any questions before we get started? Okay. So, thinking about reentry after exoneration is something I've been thinking about for a really long time. I have been in this job for 20 years and doing this work in some capacity for 25 years. And I feel like I'm still blown away on a weekly basis, every time there's a new exoneration, by how hard it is for exonerees to come out. I just learn new things every time about things that are challenging, issues that are challenging, things that come up, traumas people experience. And it's such a loaded, complicated situation. And we're going to get into more detail about it, obviously, especially when we hear from Walter. But I think it's useful for people to understand why exonerations are so difficult in the reentry context. Because obviously, anyone coming out of prison after, in Walter's case, nearly 4 decades of time in prison is going to have a hard time, right? It's difficult. It's something, society's been thinking about. It's something a lot of people are focused on. But the exoneree perspective really is very different. There are similarities, of course, but I kind of want to sort of set out some of the things that make it so different before we turn it over to Walter. The first thing is that you just don't have notice. So normally, if you've been in prison for a long time, you kind of know when you're coming out. You may not know the exact day, but you know what your sentence is. In Maryland, where Walter was incarcerated, you go to some kind of transitional facility, you have a plan, you know where you're going to go. It may not be great, but it's something. A lot of people are also released on some kind of, under some sort of supervision. So on some kind of parole or probation. So they have, again, imperfect, but they have access to resources. They have someone whose job it is to at least hand them a list of the programs that are available to people who get out. And so they have that. They they have that, and our clients don't. They are just kind of sprung. So, you've got a court case pending. A judge could have been sitting on the case for 6 years. And then on a given Tuesday, your conviction is overturned and you go. And that kind of jarring release often into a public eye. So a lot of our clients come out to throngs of reporters when they didn't know the day before they were going to be coming out. So in addition to, all of the logistical issues that come up when you're trying to leave prison, you've got the trauma of having been innocent and being in prison, and then the trauma of just the release itself being so sudden. So the result is that it's chaos for a lot of people, and it can take an incredibly long time. And it sometimes never happens for people to sort of quote unquote adjust to life outside of prison. And so what we are trying to do through our client services program is to prepare people for release, because that's something the system isn't going to do in our cases. We're trying to help them with the immediate aftermath of the release when it is so difficult just to do things like get an ID and know where you're going to sleep. And then to help people deal with the trauma all of our clients experience in the aftermath, whether they realize they've experienced it right away or whether it takes them 10 years to get to that place. And I think there's no, I've read a lot of academic papers about exoneree support and reentry, but there's no substitute for actually hearing from someone who has gone through that experience. And I really think there is nobody better, and I really mean this, nobody better probably in the country to talk about this than Walter Lomax. Walter is an extraordinary person, which you will see shortly when you hear from him. He spent 39 years in prison for a 1967 Baltimore City murder that he didn't commit. And while he was in prison, like most of our clients, just longer than most of them, he challenged his conviction as many times as he could. He kept fighting, but he also became an advocate and an activist inside prison. So he edited the prison newsletter. He advocated for better conditions. And when he was released in 2009, it was before he was exonerated. Was it 2006, Walter? 2006. There wasn't actually a way for him to be exonerated. In Maryland, there just wasn't a judicial remedy. So he was resentenced and from there fought to create the judicial remedy that ended up exonerating him and most of our other Maryland clients. And then he couldn't get compensated because even though he'd spent 39 years in prison, Maryland's law that was supposed to compensate people actually didn't. So he fought for years to get a law passed to compensate innocent people. And in 2021, the Walter Lomax Act was signed into law. He also, having spent time trying to be paroled and trying to reenter society, fought successfully again to make sure that the governor was kept out of individual parole decisions in Maryland because those are often so political, almost always so political. And he has been leading the charge to help people, both guilty and innocent, as they reenter society. He's led the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative. He mentors people when they come home. He is kind of like the godfather of all Maryland exonerees. He is the guy when you are in the Maryland State House, you are walking with a celebrity because every elected official knows, respects, and wants to talk to Walter because he's done such an incredible job taking his experience in prison, which could have just sort of taken somebody and made them say, I am done with this. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to deal with this crap anymore. And he's turned himself into an incredibly skilled and powerful advocate who has changed Maryland for the better. So with that, Walter, thank you for once again, even though you were exonerated with the help of Centurion Ministries, which was actually the first innocence organization formed in the late 1980s. He is such a good guy that he will come help us with events anytime. And so, Walter, I want to turn it over to you, but start with a question. So you spent 39 years in prison. So the tail end of the 60s, all of the 70s, all of the 80s, all of the 90s, and half of the first decade of the century. That is a really long time. How did you kind of jointly kind of deal with being in prison for that long, but also have a mindset where you were able to prepare to actually come home?
I was trying to unmute when you was asking the question. Could you run it back to me again?
Yeah. So you were in for an ungodly long time. How did you kind of, I guess this is really a two-part question, but kind of what did you do to sort of make the day-to-day kind of, I don't want to say work for you in prison, but how did you get through that day-to-day while sort of also keeping your hope alive and preparing for release?
It's not a complicated question, but uh, I'm trying to think how best to answer it for you. Uh, because there wasn't like a set preparation or plan. First, let me preface with this: is that I had the benefit of that a lot of people didn't have at that time and hasn't had since, was that I was able to participate in the work release program for 5.5 years, and I was also able to come home on family leave once a month for that 5.5 years. So this gave me uh, a pretty good picture of what I would be confronted with once I was actually released. But at that time, I was still thinking in terms of being released on parole because that was the transition that the system went through. But in 1993, excuse me, in 1993, everyone in those programs were returned back into the system. And I was back in there for 13 more years before I was ultimately released. But because of that 5.5 years, when I was actually released in 2006, it really wasn't a difficult transition for me. One is I had such a huge family and support system, and so I benefited from that, as well as having the 5.5 years experience that I was released. And then by being the editor of the newspaper, kept me abreast of current events, both inside and outside. So that transition really wasn't that difficult. But that was for me. And I think in that instant, I was maybe the exception, which is certainly not the rule. And I will preface that with that because I've been home this year almost 19 years, well, 19 years, and it's still a process. Every so often, I will have that dream or have that nightmare that I'm back in prison. That's what it'll be about, prison. And so if I'm still dealing with that, I can only imagine what some of the people that has been released and is being released is really dealing with because that experience is unlike uh, probably anything that you can imagine. I would say that. And if you haven't had it, you will never be able to understand what it is that a person deals with after that. Because we do two types of sense. When you were speaking earlier, and you was talking about the transition of people that comes out that has access to a lot of the benefits that's available to them. Whereas that when we came out, in fact, just to briefly deviate for a second, when I went to the Department of Social Services, yeah, when I was released, because we had to take my release papers there and get that official because I was on unsupervised probation. And I asked the lady, what was I entitled to? I said, could I get some welfare check or some health insurance or something? And she told me I wasn't entitled to absolutely nothing because I wasn't a part of the system. And as a result of not being a part of the system, that meant that I wasn't entitled to anything. And that's what happens when we are released, like we were being released. And so that's the type of time that we serve. The person that's serving time that committed the crime, they know what they was there for. And so their mindset is completely different from what our mindset is. Our mindset is that we're there for something that we absolutely didn't do. Excuse me. So our entire experience is completely different from that. And I've talked to uh, a lot of the men that have been released. And on the surface, because most of them have already been compensated, uh, you would think that they're okay. And the reality is that they're not. And they express that to me. It's something that, they'll never get over. They'll never be the same. And as a result of that, the work that you do is so important because you recognize that, and most people feel that, one, the individual is free, and then two, they've been compensated. And you spoke about from when I released in 2006, it took me 8 years to clear my name. 8 years to clear my name. I was very fortunate. Excuse me, I was working with a lady with the ACLU. And when she left the ACLU, her husband was worked out of Virginia and also out of Washington, D.C. And she asked me, would I mind that if she asked her husband to look into my case, because she was convinced that I was innocent. And because of what she done and he done based on what she asked him to do, I was able to get in contact with the right people that was able to present the case to get me actually exonerated. And so that was from 2006 to 2014. And as you explained, at that time, there was no mechanism for me to be compensated. And the other factor is that I wasn't concentrating so much on getting compensated, or at that, until they looked into the case, I really wasn't fighting that much for myself. I was doing a work around parole reform because, in spite of the fact that I was innocent, I realized that there were a lot of people that deserved a meaningful opportunity to be released. And so my concentration was doing something about that. And so my focus was on that work. And as a result of the focus on that work, people began to realize that, well, this man's totally innocent and he hasn't been compensated. And realizing that there was no mechanism for me to be compensated, they created a mechanism for me to be compensated. And so it took me 8 years to clear my name. I'll share this with this audience here. I won't share with a lot of people, but I could have been compensated in 2014 when I was actually exonerated. They wanted to submit a pardon to the governor, a petition for the pardon for the governor because I had prevailed under the petition of actual innocence. But they couldn't submit the petition because the work that we was doing with the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative with the ACLU, we were suing the state. And they said, well, we can't pardon or compensate you because you're suing us. And they asked me to give up. We had a class action lawsuit against them. They asked me, and because the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative represented all lifers, but the class action lawsuit was only dealing with juveniles. But they asked me to give up the lawsuit, and I still have some lawyers that's pretty upset with me today because I refused. And as a result of me refusing to do so, it took me 5 more years before we got the actual innocence petition introduced. It hadn't passed when I was eventually compensated. But I say that to say this, is that it took me 13 years, 8 to clear my name and 5 to be compensated. And because of the Walter Lomax Act, they are able to be compensated in a matter of months. And so I know what my struggle was like. I was still buying food stamps up until 2019. So for me to realize what my struggle was, and that's just dealing with being able to live, but also the psychological damage that was done, like because of what happened. Because when I went to prison, it was a death penalty case. And when I went to prison, they were still killing people in the Maryland Penitentiary. In fact, they killed some people while I was there. And every day, in order for us to go to the shower, we had to walk right by the tier where all of them were housed at. And I would always look up there and I would say, because my case was a death penalty case, I could have been up there. And if I say this, is that if I was living in Florida, Virginia, Texas, I would have already been dead because they were killing people on a regular basis there. But I wasn't. But I still think about that today. That's something that haunts me, is that I could have been on death row and I could have died. And, by the grace of God, I'm still alive. And because I was able to, I guess, convince people over an extended period of time that another short version is that the parole board used to absolutely turn me down, or wouldn't even consider me for parole for many, many years. And after a period, they began to say, well, you saying that you didn't do this is counterproductive to you getting out, because part of the criteria for us to consider you for release is to show some remorse. And at this point, showing remorse, everybody here agree that, you've done everything humanly possible and you could be released. So you said, we're not here to weigh whether you are guilty or innocent. We just decide whether it would be appropriate for us to release you. And they say that, what you're saying, the position that you're taking is counterproductive to your getting out of prison, because now if you would acknowledge, then we could say we let you go. But because I continue to refuse any form of guilt, they began to decide that, well, maybe he didn't do it, but we know that he fits the criteria to be released. He's had an impeccable prison record. He's done everything that we could humanly ask for a person being incarcerated. So that's another short version of that story. But the bottom line is this: this work is extremely important, Shawn. The damage that has been done to these folk that have been in prison wrongly, no amount of money will ever suffice to make them whole again. The best we could possibly do, right, is to, I guess, acknowledge and understand and listen to what it is that they are going through and try to help them as best we can. But the real reality is that they'll never be the same ever again. I'll never be the same, that's for sure. I had family members that have known me all their life, but they don't know me and they don't know what that struggle has been about. It's there and it will always be there. People have said that I probably need some counseling or should have got some counseling. And I said, well, it's maybe too late for me, right? But it's certainly not too late for the people that's coming after me. And so everything that we can do humanly possible to, at least make their situation a little better. And this is why the work that you do is so important.
Thank you. I guess one of the questions I have, what is it like? I don't know. I don't remember how old you were when you were first locked up.
I just turned 20.
What is it like to be 20 years old and be told that you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison?
Well, aside from not being academically well, aside from not being intellectually or academically astute to what was going on, I think, well, I know that I was naive at thinking that, well, they're going to find the person that committed these crimes, because a person don't start doing this and just stop, And I just felt, well, I thought I was naive that they'll catch this person. And over time, I think when I really realized that, maybe they're not. And this wasn't something that happened like overnight. It was over a period of time. And at some point, the realization came to me was that they closed the books. They cleaned the books up. They solved a lot of crimes. I was charged with about 13 different crimes. And so because they had closed the books on all of those crimes, whether I was the guilty person or not, didn't mean anything to them. But I wasn't aware of what that process was really like. And because I was academically, well, they said that I was borderline, I wasn't capable of learning. That's what they said. A social worker said that at some point. But anyway, once I started realizing that they wasn't going to find this person, and I realized that I didn't have access to any resources, that if I was going to get out of prison, I was going to have to get myself out of prison. And over time, I started working toward that end. People still mad with me because every time we get the books, the library that we had, an unofficial library, they would say, make sure that you don't give Lomax the book first, man, because he marked the books up, highlight them with the marker so that I can go back and read the word, get the dictionary and find out what they mean or whatever. But once I developed the basics academically and then start processing it intellectually, I started realizing what it was that I was going to have to do to get out of prison. And from that point on, I developed the concept is that I will never give in and I will never give up. I said, I'm coming up out of here. I don't know when and I don't know how. But this is not my destiny. I'm coming up out of here.
Did it?
Something went happen.
No, that was me on mute. Um, did it, because you fought for so long to come home, did it surprise you at all? I think for a lot of, at least for a lot of our clients, I feel like there's so much focus on getting out and coming home that people don't necessarily know how hard it's going to be when they get there, emotionally, especially. Was that a surprise to you? Kind of how did you deal with that?
No, well, I guess the surprise would be because, as you mentioned, that person is in prison one day and then the next day they release. So there was no, uh, I guess, time to start processing. It wasn't as if someone said, well, okay, you're going to be released in, say, 18 months or 6 months or whatever the case might be. And then you have a process that you work through. Well, basically, that's how it happened in my case. I was talking to the lawyers on the phone uh, Friday. It was definitely a weekend. I was talking to the lawyers on the phone, and they said that the state will agree to release you, but they want to keep the conviction. And I said, well, how are they going to do that? Because the judge wanted to award a new trial, but the state has said, well, we will agree to his release, but we want to keep the conviction. So I said, I said to the lawyers that, well, if it entails me uh, taking some type of plea, I'm not going to take. That's not going to happen. We just not. That's not the way this is going to happen. If this has to be protracted, then that's just the way that it'll be, which meant that they would appeal the judge's decision, and we'd have to go through that process. They came back with, well, you don't have to plead to anything, but they just want to keep the conviction. And I said, well, okay. So I'm there Friday, and Monday, it was either Monday or Tuesday, but that following week, I go to court and I'm released straight out the door. So there was no I guess time to plan about where I was going to stay. Well, I had such a huge family and a support system, so that wasn't going to be problematic. Plus, when I was in the work release and family leave program, I saved an enormous amount of funding, so I was pretty good in that instance, right? Uh, but see, again, I'm talking about me, and my situation was extremely different from most everybody else that's coming out. And because I stayed such abreast of what was going on in society and had the benefit of that 5.5 years in the work release and family leave program, that gave me a heads up. So I was prepared. I was prepared. Most of these folk, they're simply not prepared like that. They don't have those means, and psychologically so much damage has been done, even though on the surface they'll look okay because they have wore that mask on the inside. Because when you tell people that you're innocent, most of them won't believe you, and the majority of them won't give a damn. That's just that reality. So what this means is, you even don't have anybody or a very select group of people that will understand that it's very possible that you are innocent or just believe you straight out. So we are definitely in a minority, and it's you say that I'm a good person to do this, but I don't know so much whether I'm the best person to do that. And the reason why I say that is because, see, my whole mindset while I was in prison, my whole mindset once I came out of prison, because I came out of prison thinking that I had met so many people that deserved a meaningful opportunity to be released, that I'm going to be involved with something, right, to make it possible where they at least had that meaningful opportunity. So that was my focus. I wasn't concerned so much about me and my survival because I had that support system, a large family that was there for me and was going to be there for me. But even though a lot of them may have family members that would be there for them, they're really not in a position to understand exactly what it is that they've been through. And so again, I'm not the exception, but I'm not exactly the right person to maybe tell that story about the trauma that they experienced and the trauma that they're dealing with since they've been released. Uh, I could share my story, which I don't really like to do, because I think that when people hear my story, they started focusing on my story and the tragedy that happened to me, and don't put the appropriate emphasis on, what the real issue is. And the real issue is that those men and women as well, right, that have had that experience, that's the type of trauma that will be with them for the rest of their life. No amount of therapy, no amount of counseling, no amount of anything will be able to erase that. And the best we could do is to make sure, and this is why, again, why the Walter Lomax Act is so important for people to be, specifically over here in Maryland, for people to be compensated like coming out of the door. So this way they can focus on telling people no, that's asking them for money, and trying to find some place where they can like be comfortable. So that is good, because at least they know that those are things that they don't have to worry about. They don't have to worry about a place to stay. They don't have to worry about health insurance and none of that kind of stuff. they have all of those things in place for them. And so for me, that was so important that we got that done, but again, the reality is that once they've had that experience, they simply would not be the same. And you could give them $1 billion, right? And they have a lot of material stuff, but what they've been through and what lays having it on their mind is what was done to them.
Yeah. And it's, so thank you. And for us at the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, for a long time, we didn't have anything formal in place to support our clients. When I started 20 years ago, I was the only employee. We were a very shoestring operation. And even as we grew, we were getting more people out, but we had a backlog of 150 cases that needed investigation. And as the ED, I was going, well, how can I be asking for money to create a new program when we can't meet the needs of the people who need our help through this current program? But it was becoming increasingly clear, like the more people we got out, as much as, I think a lot of our clients talk the way Walter talks, right? You guys are incredibly strong people, right? You go to prison, you experience something that most of us can't imagine over decades. It's incredible trauma. And you guys are the ones who somehow just like fight your way out. And you're very strong humans. And it's not always easy to see how much struggle there is among the population. And the longer had been doing the work, the more it became very clear that what we were doing, which was clients were coming home and we were kind of like ad hoc trying to do what we could, it was insufficient, but it was also kind of an abdication of responsibility. Like if we're going to fight to bring people home, we need to fight to make sure that home is a good place to be. And so as we were coming to that conclusion, in part just because we had a lot of clients come home, but in part because we had exonerees on our board. So they had real input and real voice in what we were doing as an organization. We also had a client who got compensated, and attorney's fees from that process went to a law firm, and the client and the law firm decided to donate them to us to start our client services program. So there was kind of a great synergy and a donor who really understood how important the work was, and that even though you weren't necessarily going to be helping 150 people per year, you were going to be taking care of an important responsibility that the organization has when we bring people home. And so that allowed us to hire a client services specialist. And I'm going to be honest, we did not get a whole lot of very good applications for that role, but you only need one. And Claudia Baker came in actually through our volunteer portal. She came to us with a resume that somehow looked like it was absolutely made for this job. Death penalty mitigation work, working for the National Center for Trauma at the VA, working with homeless veterans, then setting up a program at the State Department for families of hostage victims, AKA people who are wrongfully incarcerated in other countries. And so when that resume came in, no one else was interviewed. And we begged her to apply for the actual job. And she did. And so she has been with us for 2 years and has set up like an actual program to help people who are coming home, and we're doing it. And so Claudia, just kind of wanted to turn it over to you. How did you go about kind of setting up a client services program?
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for the kind words, Shawn. That was nice and always nice to hear. Yeah, I wanted to volunteer, and they said, well, we don't really need to volunteer, but we have a job. Would you be interested? So here I am. But I wanted to set up something that was drawing on my experience with the VA that was trauma informed, that had a fair amount of self-determination, and that addressed both psychological, social, and biological kind of needs. I'm a social worker, so we talk about biopsychosocial assessments and treatment. So that's kind of the framework that I came to. So I set up, I'll just talk a little bit about what we do. I'd like to start with meeting people before they're released. That's not always possible, but we've developed a system where when people reach a certain point in their legal case, the lawyers will send a referral to me, and I'll go meet with them a couple, depending on how much time we have, I'll meet with them regularly, so that they get to know me, I get to know them. I do the full kind of psychosocial assessment, talk to them about what their plan would be, get to know the family, get to know what resources are out there. So that then people have a plan, and then they also have a relationship with me to draw on. It's not just kind of I come out of nowhere when they're released. So that's kind of the beginning, and bringing also the family members on board and educating them. When I was working with the State Department and the hostage program, we did a lot of work on what to expect when the person comes home. They're not going to be the person who left, and don't expect them to be, and how can you manage your own reactions with that? So that's another piece that I like to work in. Then I do case management with people as they come out, help, which is, if you're not familiar with social work terminology, helping people access resources, following up with them, making sure they get the resources, anything from a birth certificate to substance abuse treatment, to financial planners, to a will, kind of anything like that. And I also do what I like to call supportive therapy as in conjunction with that. I have found that what works best is kind of like an informal approach. People aren't all that thrilled to the idea of sitting in a room and talking to me. They like to go out for walks, go to the mall, and in that kind of space, people tend to talk more, I've noticed, and can talk about the trauma and the feelings that they're having as they go through the release process. Something that occurred to me when Walter was talking about the compensation, and it's a huge help to have a compensation right away. But the first client I worked with through that process, I was talking to him and I said, oh, congratulations on, getting your funding approved. And I expected him to be very excited, and he was mad, because he said, people think this is just going to make everything go away. I still went through all this. So I think you know who I'm talking about, Shawn. He wasn't mad, but it's just the emotion that I didn't expect, because it's just such a monumental trauma to go through. And then he kind of felt like the government was throwing money at him to make him go away. So it's been an interesting learning process. That really surprised me, because I was on the phone with him thinking that he was going to be thrilled, and it brought up a lot of feelings, I think. So then also another thing that I noticed when I worked with the VA is I did individual counseling, and then I also did groups. And in my opinion, I could talk until I was blue in the face, and it wasn't going to do as much as the groups did. I was mostly working with Vietnam veterans, so I wanted to incorporate that into our program. So I've done a lot of what I call community building, having events for people to come together, because with trauma survivors, one of the most important things is incorporating self-help. So allowing people to feel like something good came out of this horrible experience, and that they're able to help other people. And then also just feeling understood, because none of us can really understand what that's going to be like, and what it's going to be like coming back. So we've had baseball games, we had a storytelling workshop, we had a holiday party. I've gotten people together in an informal setting, 2 or 3 people, to share stories. So doing a lot of that. And the final piece is we have some funding also from that donation that we can use for practical, when someone first comes out of jail or prison, and also longer term when they're trying to kind of figure out what they're going to do with their lives. So we've bought, I had one guy, and his friend said he could stay in his downstairs in-law unit. So I went and I visited him there, but he's sleeping on the floor with a blanket. So I said, would you like to have a bed? So we were able to buy him a bed, which he was thrilled with. So we get people phones, we've gotten people, clothes, because people don't have anything to wear. And then as people get kind of farther into recovering, we had a client, for example, who was getting his substance abuse counselor certification, and he was at the final semester and he just ran out of money. So we were able to pay for that final semester at the Baltimore Community College for him to get his substance abuse certificate. Now he's working with kids doing that. So, and we have somebody else I'm trying to work with, to get into a CDL, commercial driver's license program. And we might be able to pay for some of that. So, anyhow, that's what I do. That's what our program consists of. And it's great work. I enjoy it and I enjoy the team and the clients.
I sneaky back, and so does the team. And it's been kind of amazing to see it go from something that a few of our former clients were pushing for to something a client was able to fund, and now seeing it be like an actual program that is helping other clients as they come through has been a pretty amazing piece of the process. I know now that, I think according, and not, this is not political, but just according to the Department of Justice, kind of lived experience and things like that are things we're not supposed to be looking at as much anymore. But I do think that, especially in this context, just a program like this is a testament to how important it is to have people with lived experience in the room helping develop policies, and programs. So people can, and feel free to chat or send it through the Q&A, but do people have any questions? I know we didn't, because this was about reentry, we didn't talk very much about like the details of Walter's story. There's a whole lot there. I feel like there are a million things I can talk about reentry, because there are so many different aspects of it that just continue to surprise me. But like, have at it. Oh, so DNA was not involved in Walter's exoneration. So most cases don't involve DNA. It's a really, really small minority of them. For the most part, the only times DNA would be dispositive are like a single perpetrator rape case where it's a stranger identification. It can be used in other cases for sure, but you have to have, if it's a drive-by shooting, there's not going to be any DNA there. And most of the cases we see, especially now, because DNA testing is done so often pre-trial, that's not what we see. In Walter's case, and Walter's going to correct me when I mess it up, there were a few different things. So the first is that at the time of the crime, the murder in question, Walter was physically incapable of having done it. He had injured his arm and could not have actually fired a gun and done the things necessary to perpetrate the crime. And his lawyer kind of attempted to introduce some of that evidence at trial, but it wasn't, he could have done more. There were also, so he was convicted based on 5 cross-racial identifications. I think it was withheld from the defense that 2 people had actually failed to identify him. And there was also an initial composite sketch that looked nothing like Walter. What else am I missing, Walter? What are the other pieces?
They're the most important ones. It was the cross-racial identification. Definitely an effective assistant of counsel, that's for sure.
Misconduct.
And the fact that I wasn't capable of committing the crime, that was the most important. And you're absolutely right, the lawyer didn't do enough to make that case. This was something that when I was ultimately released, it was there were several factors, but one of the factors was that the judge realized when she looked at the evidence about the hand injury. Not that it was impossible, but very unlikely that I could have committed that crime. So no, you got the facts pretty much correct, Shawn.
Okay, I'm kind of surprised. It's good. And it's, Walter's case was also tricky because obviously, like, he could not have committed the crime physically, but his lawyer sort of knew that at trial and just did a very poor job of like presenting it in a way that was clear. So it's not ineffective assistance of counsel because the lawyer kind of tried, but it's also not new evidence because the lawyer knew about it. And so that put Walter before there was kind of a real remedy for people who were convicted based on, who were wrongfully convicted and had new evidence. It put him in this weird zone where there was just no legal remedy for him. Okay. Ooh, now we have a bunch of questions. This is good. All right. So, Amber McDonald. And Walter, I'm going to read it out loud so that everybody hears it. Walter, thanks so much for sharing tonight. Shawn, how can we best support this important work? ED's favorite question. I'm sure money is always needed. Are there any other ways to give? For example, baseball tickets, phones, etc. And is there any way to support those still in prison who are working with MAIP to be exonerated? A pen pal program, perhaps. So, obviously in my role as ED, I have to say, and it's true that financial contributions, and some of you on here are donors, that is pivotal and allows us to do the work of getting people out and supporting them when they come home. That's hugely important. There are definitely other ways to give. We are, like, for example, we went to a Baltimore Orioles game last year and they donated the tickets to us, but they don't do that 2 years in a row. And the clients all want to go back. And so this year we are using the funds we have to buy tickets for people, but baseball tickets, football tickets, because I think football is even more exciting for most of our clients than baseball. Would be amazing if people do have access to things like phones that can be given to people. That's amazing. Of the most recent client who came home in February, being able to hand him a phone with numbers kind of pre-programmed in was huge and like a really great thing for him. We don't always have a ton of notice, obviously, when there is a wrongful conviction, but sometimes if we do, things like clothes, toiletries, we don't have a ton of in-house capacity to collect things like that. And we wouldn't need a mass number of them, but things like that could be useful. And then a pen pal program, this is something we have talked about internally. And there was a donor who requested this once, and it went a little bit off the rails. And so we have shied away from it. One thing I've thought about is like holiday cards. So not as much pen pal, but sort of a holiday card situation where people can, and that's something that's, everybody who doesn't like to get holiday cards, I'm sure there's somebody, but it's just nice and something that can just make your day in prison a little bit more pleasant. So we are, I have toyed with that idea. And if we have people who are interested, I'd be up for trying a little harder. Okay. Did that answer the questions? Amber, where'd you go? I lost you. You're down at the bottom. Okay. So Kara, been teaching forensic science for 20 years outside Chicago, dying to know where in Chicago. Over these years, wrongful conviction and exonerations have become my passion, which is awesome. Just today, I showed my students the Innocence Project website and went through the causes of wrongful conviction. Thank you. And you're going to be sharing his story. His story is amazing. You really do some digging into Walter, because it's really interesting, I think, for students too, because of the timing, kind of the late 60s, kind of what was happening nationally. There's just a lot you can learn from his story. And Kara, I'd love to know where in Chicago you're from and where you teach, but I also should keep going with questions. Um, let's see here. All right, Aaron, what reforms are still most urgently needed for people getting out after wrongful convictions? Whew. So, I mean, we still are not at all 50 states having compensation for for people who are exonerated. So I think making sure all 50 states actually compensate people is critical. I also think, especially a lot of the earlier compensation bills really focused on money only, and money is really important. And that is absolutely crucial. But one of the things, and Walter, you can speak to this more too, that I think is so great about the Maryland bill is that it does weave in non-monetary elements. It's probably not a shock to know that not all of our clients are able to manage the money over a lifetime. And frankly, it's usually not that much money when you factor in, a lifetime of lost employment and a lifetime of trauma. So in Maryland and in a growing number of other states, but still not enough, things like health insurance are covered, educational credits, other, kind of therapy, there are other supports that are built in that are non-monetary and are things people can access potentially when they don't have that money around. So I really think building that kind of support, I just, if the state takes away 27 years of your life or 39 years of your life, you shouldn't have to be 60 and wondering how you're going to make ends meet. And so putting things together so that that's not a place exonerees find themselves, I think is really important. And I also think, like Walter, a lot of clients come out and are still fighting for their exoneration, but that fight, and this really is more about getting out, but there really is a penalty for innocence in the system. Your charges are harsher, your sentences are harsher, parole is harder, everything about it is harder when you claim innocence. And so doing something to make those penalties less intense throughout the process, I think is really important. Walter, what do you think?
What do I think? I think that y'all doing great work. That's the first thing. And Maryland system like really works. It really works well. And it covers everything except for what the individuals are dealing with psychologically because of the experience. And you're also doing great work is by creating like support groups where I don't know so much now, but I know at one point they would communicate with each other, and they had maybe not a social network, but at least they had a group of people that they knew that had the same experience, and they would connect with each other. Even more so than in some cases with their family members. And that's very good. And those are the important things that I think that really, really needs to be looked at, specifically now that compensation is really not that much of an issue when they meet the criteria anyway. And once that's done, the other thing is just having that strong support system and being around people that really understands what it is that they experience psychologically and the trauma that they had to deal with. Those are probably the best things that could possibly be done because again, they had the money. That's not an issue. And I think, as Claudia mentioned, she thought that the individual was going to be very happy when he got compensated. It was like, you can't just throw money at me and I'm going to go away. Well, I guess they realized that with me back in 2014 when I could have been compensated. It was like, money is really not an issue here and there. The issue is that, what these people are experiencing. And until we get that solved, then money really won't be a factor.
Any other questions from anybody? We're at 8:03. I want to be respectful.
8:03.
8:03 went fast.
This is great.
Yes. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you guys so much for coming and asking really good questions and giving us your time. We really appreciate it. And truly, like, if you have ideas for things that, I can't promise that we can necessarily deliver on some of the volunteer opportunities, but if we know people are interested, it's something we can potentially build toward, because it's hard for us to get non-lawyers involved in this work, and we'd love ideas for how to do something, how to have something for people who aren't lawyers. So thank you.
Shawn, before we leave,
Yeah.
I know when he was talking about the compensation, I mean, not compensation, pen pals. I would come back with that because I used to have interns that worked with me from various universities, and I would have them corresponding with some of the prisoners, and it really took on a whole life of its own. I I had to do a lot of work because they were young ladies, and when they were hearing about the individual story, it was like the doctor is treating the patient, and the patient falls in love with the doctor because of the treatment and think that that's real love. And so, because the interns were corresponding with the prisoners, they was falling in love with them and started writing them love letters and stuff. And I was like, okay, hold up. We got to really change this.
That is not how ours went off the rails, to be clear. Ours, the pen pal was asking the client about the case. Like, they just ended up writing each other about the case. And as lawyers, that makes us so paranoid because those are monitored. So we were like, no. But I think there might be some way of communicating warmth and concern from the community without creating legal problems. So we'll try to figure that out.
I had to shut a few people down straight away, right? Just said, look, you cut. That's it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to offer that is that way when you start create the pen pal, it can create a whole different dynamic than what you originally intended for it to be.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you. This was
Night.
very informative.
Thank you. Good night.
Walter.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.
Shawn, did it freeze?
No, I just haven't left because I didn't know if there was anything I should.
You're fine.
think
I was just waiting for everyone to leave before I shut
I
off.
felt like I should be one of the last people to leave.
It's just my parents now, so it's fine.
Paige.
Hi, Paige.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm so glad that's your parents.
Those are my parents.
Jamelia. Anyway.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.